As you become better and better at Excel and start using more and more formulas, you'll find that the things that go wrong are different from when you started using Excel. So if you use Excel and you have a very manual approach, you don't know a lot of formulas, you'll find that most of your mistakes involve manual errors, involve data entry errors, those kinds of things, because you're doing a very manual work-heavy approach. But if you start using a lot of formulas and start using automated methods, automated tools, and formulas, the kinds of things that go wrong are a little more startling, because if you have the formula, if that's wrong and you're copying that down, that means everything might be wrong. It may not just be one random thing that's wrong, it might be the whole document that's wrong. So it really becomes very important for you as an Excel expert to become an expert at checking your own work, an expert at looking at your own work and making 100% sure that it is working exactly as you intend it to work. This is kind of like debugging in programming or something like that. So there's a few tools Excel actually has built into it that make this process a little bit easier, and you should know about them so that you can be really, really good at Excel and feel really comfortable with the results you're getting, because you've actually looked at every step of the process and looked at how all the formulas are functioning and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we've done some work in previous videos here, and we're going to kind of just look over that work and use some of the tools we have available to us. Probably the most powerful tool, probably one of the best key commands in Excel, is CTRL+TILDE. Now tilde is the squiggly, the squiggly line in the upper left-hand corner of most typical keyboards. So if we hold down Control and click tilde, your document kind of explodes. If you ever hit upon this formula, this key command by accident, you might have freaked out because everything looks really weird now. And what's happened basically is every cell now, instead of showing the results of the formula, are just showing their formulas, their raw formulas as you entered them. And you can see it's just very, very busy. And then when you scroll to the right, you'll see the raw data cells just look like data as they did before. So only the formula-based cells get affected. This is actually a really, really useful feature because you can very quickly look through your formulas and say, okay, I used index matching here. I used a VLOOKUP here. That's how this was working. And I was referring to my sales modification table. I can go up here and find out where that sales modification table was by just clicking on it. And there it is. It's in this tab. And I can say, okay, that looks correct. That looks like the right table to be referring to. And then look at what it's doing and what cells it's using and all that kind of stuff. So you can very quickly just see your formulas, see all your formulas, make sure they're all consistent, and sort of get a good sense of what your document's doing, and just hit CTRL+TILDE when you're done, and it all goes back to normal. And you can achieve that same effect by going to under the Formulas tab and just clicking on Show Formulas. Does exactly the same thing. Great. Now, there's a bunch of other tools here too, which are kind of useful. One, which could be kind of confusing at first, but is really useful once you get the hang of it, is these trace precedence and trace dependence tools. What these are going to do is show you arrows pointing to the cells which are influencing the cell that you click on or are influenced by the cell that you click on. So, if I click over here and look at one of these raw data cells, which is the sales data, and I click on trace precedence, trace the data that is affecting that cell, what's going to happen is nothing. It's going to say, well, there aren't any precedents. What are you doing? This is not valid. And that's because this is a data cell. There's no formulas here. There's nothing preceding that cell. This is just the sales data. But if I go here and say trace precedence, there's actually two precedents. One is the original sales data here, and the other is the modifier. So this cell, as talked about in a previous video, looks here. If there's no modification made, it will return the original sales percent, and if there is a modification, it will return the modification. So these two cells are precedents of the cell in H5. Now, I can click around. I can keep adding these if I want to. I can go here and do the same thing. In this one, because referring to a lookup table, it's showing you a line item to a lookup table that's used to refer to this, or some kind of named range elsewhere on another tab. And what I'm going to do now is just hit remove arrows to get rid of all that stuff, clear up my document. I can also use trace dependence. So if I go over here and click on trace dependence, you'll see that this cell is dependent on this cell. Let me remove arrow again. If I click here, trace dependence, This cell is dependent upon this cell. Great. And if I click over here and trace dependence, nothing will happen because nothing's referring to that cell. This cell is referring to other cells. It has precedence, but it doesn't have any dependence. Great. So these arrows are great in a much more complicated document where you don't really remember what's referring to what, and you want to make sure that everything is referring to the correct, to what it's supposed to be referring to. So these sort of tools are a great way to visualize how Excel is accessing data in the document and make sure it's behaving in the way that you intended it to. Another great tool which is helpful, especially for longer formulas, let's click over here, this match index formula, which we talked about in a previous video. We can go to evaluate formula. And what evaluate formula does, and it's not perfect, but what it tries to do is sort of evaluate parts of the formula and show you what each part of them returned as it's building up to the final result. So if I say evaluate, it's going to show you the range that is the country of origin range as a range instead of a named range. It's going to replace this with Buick rather than the cell that it originally had. It's going to replace manufacturer, the lookup table, the named range rather of manufacturer. It's going to just replace it with its actual range. It's going to start returning, this is the 13th thing, that's what it was doing when it was matching. And then it returns United States because that United States was the 13th item on that range. So without getting into, once again, how this formula works and what it's doing, this helps you evaluate your formula and make sure that it's working in the way that you intended to, make sure it's doing what you want it to. And, ultimately, you're the sort of the programmer of your worksheet. You're the designer of it, and you're designing it to solve problems. You're designing it to automate processes to make your life more efficient and the lives of others more efficient. And it's up to you to make sure that your work is right. It's up to you to check it and look over it and make sure that everything is working as you intend. Another great thing to do is just go up to Name Manager, check your name ranges to see if you have any named ranges that have errors next to them or are not referring to anything. Any named ranges that are referring to other documents. That can happen when you copy and paste data from other documents. A lot of the times you want to delete those named ranges because unless you intentionally are making a named range that's supposed to refer to another document, it can be kind of messy to have name ranges referring to all over the place. If you send this document to someone else, they may not have any access to the data in the range that it's referring to. They may not have access to the other document. It's great to make documents self-contained when possible, though of course some project designs require multiple documents to function, which maybe we'll talk about in a future video. Anyway, thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment. If this was helpful, please definitely like the video and subscribe to get access to more videos as they're released.